Hi, everybody. Today's Tuesday, June 16, 2026, and our dear friend Professor Marandi is here with us. Welcome back.
Thank you for inviting me, Dima. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure.
I want to start with the statement of Hezbollah yesterday because it was so important. Many people were arguing that Iran, by making this or agreeing on this MOU, there's somehow Iran is betraying Hezbollah, is betraying Lebanon, and all of this nonsense that is coming out, in my opinion. But from the statement of Hezbollah, they they said that Hezbollah specifically command Iran's supreme leader, president, government, armed forces, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard (IRGC). And what is important in this statement, in my opinion, the way that they were talking about how Iran is bringing the acts of resistance together, Iran is supporting the acts of resistance, and the ongoing fight. And the fight is not, over, and it's ongoing. And with the case of Lebanon, as we know, and the main problem is in Lebanon itself, and that's why they called in this statement. They say Hezbollah argues that Lebanon should use the current international and regional support to strengthen its sovereignty. And it says it urges Lebanese government and political factions to adopt a unified national position. This is the moment, I think, for Lebanon to understand that as time goes by, I think the main agenda on the part of Israeli is to make some sort of civil war in Lebanon. And right now with MOU, nobody knows what's going on with MOU, but at least Iran is trying to put pressure on the United States for the case of Lebanon to withdraw from Lebanon. What do we know on that front, and how serious is that? Because to respond to these people who are arguing that Iran just is not backing Lebanon, is not backing Hezbollah, and what is, I think it's better to start with what is the nature, what is the reality of the relationship between Iran and Hezbollah for many of our audience who don't understand that.
Well, I think the criticisms of Iran and Hezbollah can be online, especially, can be and also offline, can be divided perhaps into three groups. One are the bots, and they are controlled by different countries, whether they're Arab family regimes in the Persian Gulf or other dictatorships in the American camp, or they are Israeli, or they are controlled by the MEK. You're always going to have a large number of these accounts that are going to attack Iran, Hezbollah, no matter what they do. So if they fire back, they'll be attacked for firing back. If they hold their fire, they'll be attacked for holding their fire. If they carry out a ceasefire, they'll be attacked for carrying out a ceasefire. If they fight again, they'll be attacked for violating the ceasefire. So no matter what happens, this group, and they're of course controlled by forces and players in the region who are either Western, and support the genocide, or Western funded, which would only do what the West wants, or they are from our region and funded by these Arab regimes that do nothing for the people of Palestine, for the people of Lebanon, and for the region. They're just regimes that are in the American camp. So we shouldn't take them too seriously. The second group is people across the world who are passionate about Palestine and Lebanon, and who are very eager to see Iran and Hezbollah punish the Israeli regime and punish the empire. But they also have to take into account that the axis of evil is very powerful, and the axis of resistance is Iran, Yemen, Hezbollah, and the resistance in Iraq. So this axis of evil that's controlled by the empire is literally the entire region. The region is either has been directly involved in war against Iran, or they're silently cooperating with the United States, such as the regime in Azerbaijan, and of course the fact that Turkey allows the United States to use its territory against us, its radar installations, as well as NATO jets to monitor our movements, and of course the Kurdish areas in northern Iraq, and so on. So the this is a very difficult fight for the Iranians and Hezbollah. The sacrifices made by the resistance in Lebanon are enormous. And the sacrifices made by the Iranians are huge over the years, and in particular during the last year. Right now, we're during the anniversary. This is the anniversary of the 12-day war, and it was today when I was in Iranian radio and television when in the building that you and I met once, I think, where when they bombed Iranian radio and television. So this is this is a tough war that's been going on. Iran has made many sacrifices along the way, and Iran is doing whatever it can to help the people of Gaza and to help the people of Lebanon and to help all of its friends and allies. But Iran is one country under maximum pressure sanctions. So the expectations should not be beyond what is possible. The third are Iranians. There is a significant segment of Iranian society that is opposed to the agreement, and they believe that we should get a better deal, and that the United States is completely untrustworthy, which is true. And there are, of course, things in the deal that I'm not happy about. But I think ultimately, taking into consideration the reality on the ground, I think it was a good deal. You can't get everything you want when you're facing this huge coalition of evil. Iran won the war, and it won the siege warfare, and and at the negotiating table, it has the upper hand. But the enemy has not been swept away, and the supporters of Zionism and genocide haven't disappeared, and their regional proxies are still their regional proxies. So those Iranians in Iran who are angry, and sometimes when they meet me on the streets, they express their anger at me, even though I'm not a negotiator. But they do express their anger, and I've had an interesting couple of days. But I think that in general, what what has come out of this agreement is good. Does that mean that this agreement is going to be implemented? No, no one says that. And if the United States does not carry out its side of the bargain, the agreement will fail. We don't trust the Americans at all. We're not naive, and we're not going to repeat the mistakes that we've made before. For example, with regards to the nuclear deal, the JCPOA, or other agreements we've had with the United States. This time around, Iran is going to use its leverage, and it's going to be very assertive in using that leverage. So we are at the beginning of this process, but the people of Lebanon are have from what I know, they're happy that this is that we are moving towards a potential end to this phase of the conflict, and we expect the Israeli regime to do whatever it can to disrupt the deal, to destroy the deal, and Iran will do whatever it can to make sure that the Israeli regime fails in whatever it does. So it is a fluid situation, but we have to remember that right now, the reality on the ground is that Iran, after the war, it remained standing, and it wasn't that Iran survived, because during the war, a lot of people were saying that for Iran to win is for Iran to survive, it means Iran win. It wasn't like that. In fact, in the war, Iran hit hard day and night till the end of the war. It wasn't just like a boxer who was being. I haven't watched boxing in decades. I only watched Muhammad Ali, but that was when I was a kid. But it's not like a boxer who's being punched all the time and they failed to knock him out or knock him down. No, Iran hit back as hard, if not harder. Iran bombed the Israeli regime regularly. Iran destroyed all those U.S. bases in the region, or badly damaged them. And Iran destroyed the assets of those regimes that participated in the attack on Iran, who facilitated the war, and whenever Iran's oil and gas or critical infrastructure was targeted. And the damage done to those who stood against Iran, in my opinion, are greater than the damage that was done to Iran. And the damage that was done to Iran, except for the damage to Iran's critical infrastructure like petrochemical plants or the steel factories or steel mills or the pharmaceutical plants, which are soft targets, or the Iran gas industry, if you look at the Iranian military, very little damage was done. The Iranian Air Force was, for the most part, hidden away. Iranian anti-aircraft systems were hidden away. The Iranian missile bases are all intact. Their drone bases, their factories are all intact. They had very little success in that regard, whereas Iran had enormous success. So Iran, it wasn't just that Iran survived, Iran won the war. And then the Americans carried out their siege warfare. They failed. That's why when Netanyahu made the foolish mistake of bombing Beirut and Iran was about to retaliate in a heavy-handed way, Trump gave those concessions and we had a deal because we were at a stalemate. Contrary to what Trump was saying and what the Pakistani prime minister was saying, we didn't have a final text. And this is, this. So, and we were stuck on a number of issues, including on Lebanon and including on ending the siege on Iranian ports from day one, because they wanted to do it from the second month. And so after Netanyahu's strike in Iran's beginning, when Iran was preparing to strike back, Trump immediately went and ordered his people to give the concessions. And that's why we are where we are. So Iran is in a strong position. But again, we have to be realistic. The enemy has not been vanquished. This empire is still there. And my expectation is that people who support the resistance and the axis of resistance have to put pressure on their governments, wherever they may be on this planet, to change policy. If it's regional governments, they have to put pressure to change policy on Palestine and on with regards to the United States. And if they're beyond the region, they have to do whatever they can peacefully in order to force their governments to tilt further away from the Israeli regime and these forces of genocide.
What is the understanding on the part of Iranians when it comes to Israeli attack on Iran? Many of us, we are talking about this every time, that we know that without the help of the United States, they're not going to be able to hit Iran because they have to refuel their fighter jets. And is that going to be mentioned in the agreement? Because without the United States, Israel is not going to be able to attack Iran in a significant way. That's the main point. And how is that going to be reflected in the memorandum of understanding or any sort of agreement that is coming down the road?
Well, the memorandum of understanding, the first phase, is the easy part. And the easy part, we're not sure if it's going to be smooth sailing. In fact, I would be very surprised if the next 2 months was smooth sailing. I'd be shocked. The real issues have to do with the second phase, the US presence in the region, the Israeli threats, Gaza, Lebanon, the nuclear program, sanctions, all of these will have to be dealt with, all of them. And Iran is not going to accept. I mean, the second phase is not about Iran's nuclear program. The West keeps saying that. The Americans keep saying that. The Western media keeps saying that. It's about many things, including the sanctions on Iran. The Americans are not going to get any concessions unless they give even bigger concessions. And those concessions have to do with the future stability of our region and, of course, the situation in Palestine, the situation in Lebanon. All of these are factors that will have to be dealt with.
The other point, Professor Marandi, is the way that I don't know, it was mentioned in the agreement, in the MOU, that if Israel attacks again Beirut or Dahia, Iran would definitely respond to Israel, because Iran back down, decided not to attack Israel because of MOU and the concession that you've mentioned on the part of the United States. How is that going to be treated if Israel attacks again Dahia or Beirut?
The red line is there. We were, as you rightly point out, we were about to strike, but then they gave the concessions. The concessions had to do with Lebanon. They had to do with Lebanon itself. So we could fire a few missiles, and then the Americans could withdraw those concessions, and then we could have another month of them destroying different parts of Lebanon. And of course, the resistance would fight back and hit them. But the calculation was that now that they've agreed to end the war and leave, that would be a defeat for the Israeli regime. And if Netanyahu obeys Trump, he's broken. If he disobeys Trump, it's bad news for him, and Trump is humiliated. So they've been put in a sort of this checkmate in this respect. They put the if the Israeli regime prevents the deal from moving forward, then the world is going to blame the regime, not only for being genocidal, not only for starting this crisis, not only for creating this energy crisis, but refusing to stop. So the regime and the Hebrew press, it's obvious that they're not happy at all. They're very unhappy. And so I think that Iran had decided to fire those missiles. It didn't back down. It had decided. That is why Trump made those concessions, because he knew that Iran was going to attack. And then he made the concessions that filled the gap between the Iranian position and the American position, which a big part of it was linked to Lebanon.
How is the situation between Iran and GCC countries as time goes by with MOU and with the new sort of move on the part of Iran and the United States? Because after all, when it comes to the region, I think that is of particular importance. The way that Iran sees GCC countries, the way GCC countries see the new sort of situation in the West Asia, considering the Strait of Hormuz. And is that going to bring some sort of sanity to the region?
I was hoping that we'd talk about the football match between Iran and New Zealand, but you insist on talking about these very death and destruction.
By the way, that was amazing. Yeah.
Did you see how many fans Iran had at the stadium?
Yeah.
How many people supported Iran and across the world? A friend of mine today, he told me not to say who. He did an interview with a major world leader, a very important person who that person's name. That person's name. Not a leader, a major person whose name is on the map. And that person was saying, he or she, that they are rooting for Iran on everything. I have the sentence, like, I am so much a fan of Iran. And maybe offline I'll tell you, but because he told me, he asked me not to say who it was. But in any case, it was quite extraordinary. It was quite interesting to see how inside the United States, Iran has so many fans. And interestingly, that the monarchists, they called for protests against the Iranian team. And they were like 12 in number when the team arrived in the United States for the match. Even though the United States is treating the Iranian team very poorly, they have to leave on the day of they come in on the day of the match and then they leave on the same day. And a couple of the Iranian players, they cannot go back in for now. It's not clear what will happen. But in any case, the point is that Iran played Iran played well. But the point is that Iran has such support inside the United States. And it just shows to me how Western media and Western the empire is losing its control over the narrative.
Yeah.
But you're going to say something.
Yeah, the point was the situation between Iran and GCC countries. Then you moved.
Yeah, I was about to answer that. I thought you were going to add something to the game, but with regards to the football match. So, Iran is in negotiations with all 5 of these countries.
The reason I'm asking this, because right now Donald Trump is meeting the Qatari government, the head of Qatari government, the UAE, the head of UAE is talking about the deal, how the situation is moving forward. That's why I'm asking this. I want to know Iranian position on that.
Well, first of all, another thing that Trump said was that Israel should leave Lebanon and let Syria do it.
Exactly.
Syria deal with Hezbollah. Yeah. And that shows, and for all those people out there who supported the Al-Qaeda and ISIS elements over the years and who lied to people that these were just ordinary Syrians who were standing up against the previous regime. Those on the Qatari payroll, the Saudi payroll, the Emirati payroll, Erdogan's payroll, Western payroll of Western governments. those who lied about chemical weapons in Syria, the real chemical weapons were used against us, and not in Syria. Those were fake attacks, as people like Aaron Mate and many others have rightly pointed out. And the whistleblowers in who went to Syria um, and saw the discrepancies in the accusations that were made. So yeah, it says a lot about Jolani, who by the way tried desperately as hard as he could to block the border between Syria and Lebanon so that Iran could not smuggle anything in to support Hezbollah. So Jolani, the government in Lebanon, the president and the prime minister, the Israeli regime, Trump, all of them collaborated with Western embassies, Western NGOs, and these Arabic regimes in the Persian Gulf through their proxies in Lebanon. They all collaborated to strangle the refugees and to strangle the resistance. But anyway, they failed, and history will remember that what Hezbollah did and what the resistance did and what their supporters, which include Sunnis, Shias, Christians, and Druze. The family of the resistance in Lebanon is a big one, and the tent is very broad. But in any case, the Jolani government will fail. I mean, if they attempt anything, missiles will come into his palace, will strike his palace, and drones will destroy his army, and the Iraqi resistance will overthrow him. So I doubt Jolani will be stupid enough to do such a thing. But the negotiations between Iran and these countries is ongoing, and there has been some progress, and there's been progress with Saudi Arabia. And what all Iran wants is that for these countries to distance themselves from the West and to not to trust the United States. The United States does not care about them. They've paid the Americans trillions of dollars. They've given trillions of dollars to the Americans. And what happened when they allowed the United States to use their territory against Iran? The United States couldn't protect them, didn't even care to protect them. Yes, they were, of course, a partner in this crime, but they didn't think that the Americans would be so weak and that the Americans would be so indifferent and that the Americans would prioritize the life of a single Zionist over the entire population of the Arabian Peninsula. But I think that has made them more realistic. So the Iranians are trying to convince them to change course and to establish a better relationship with Iran and to strengthen, which would weaken the Israeli regime if the region came together and the tensions decline and countries would be sovereign instead of being proxies of the empire. It would be to their benefit. It would be to the benefit of their people, and it would be to the detriment of the Israeli regime. But some progress has been made. And as I said, they're not speaking to them collectively. These are one-on-one negotiations going on.
Is the blockade of the United States in the Persian Gulf over? And what is the
Yes.
situation with the Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz?
The blockade is over. At the moment, the Iranians will only allow certain ships to pass through the strait. And Iran will continue to control the Strait of Hormuz permanently. And after the 2 months, Iran will begin receiving fees that are for environmental protection, for insurance, and for safety and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and that's in coordination with Oman, in my opinion, because
right.
There were some talks that Iran going to coordinate with Oman. These two countries basically control the Strait of Hormuz, and we had some sort of arguments that maybe GCC countries they have some sort of talks among the countries in the Persian Gulf. What is that?
Well, negotiations and cooperation are all fine and good, and that's what Iran is seeking. But if you mean for controlling the Strait of Hormuz, no, that's not for them to control. It's Iranian and Omani territorial water, but Iran is pushing for greater dialogue with other countries in the Persian Gulf region.
Which country was the most influential, sort of mediator in the talks between Iran and the United States? It was Pakistan or Qatar, because recently we've seen Qatar coming 2 times to Iran, talking with Iranians while negotiations or talks or somehow messages were going on.
They both played a constructive role, but at the end of the day, Nima, unless there is a will for the United States in the United States to solve a problem for whatever reason, not for benign intentions, but because of their own problems. If there is the will, then there will be progress. If there is no will, nothing that the Qataris or the Pakistanis or anyone else does is going to have any impact. It's only when the Americans recognize that Iran is strong and Iran is not intimidated that they give concessions, and the Iranians are going to continue showing strength uh, when it comes to the United States at the negotiating table, because they only understand strength, they only understand power, and Iran is not shy about. I mean, before Iran was always cautious. Iran was always trying to refrain from escalation, and even people like myself some were very critical. Some people like me on certain occasions were critical that we're being too soft. But after the war was imposed on Iran, this not last year's war, this war, the Iranians have become much more assertive, and that is going to remain the case. The enemy has given it its best shot. It did its best to destroy us, and it failed. And so from now on, we know that they don't have anything more up their sleeves. They can continue war. They can kill more Iranians and more Lebanese and more Palestinians. That's possible, but they can't win. And so the Iranians are going to be much tougher for now on, because they pushed us into this new situation. The region has changed. The world has changed. The status of the Strait of Hormuz has changed, and Iran will make sure that that is reflected at the negotiating table and whatever comes from the negotiations. But that doesn't mean that we're going to have a deal. This is just an MOU, and it could crash next week. It could crash next month, and we can reach stalemate in 2 months, and we could have war in weeks and months. Everything is possible. Iran is preparing for all those scenarios.
Is there any sort of talks or negotiations with the Iraqi government, considering their air defense system or the way that they can control their airspace? Because their airspace was used against Iran during the war, and they have used it over and over to attack Iran. What can Iran do to improve that, to reduce that risk of using Iraqi airspace against Iran?
The Iraqi government has to break the hold that the Americans have over them. Thanks to Saddam Hussein and his stupidity and his perpetual wars against Iran and Kuwait, the Americans were able to invade the country, but also the Americans have a stranglehold over the Iraqi money that goes that comes as a result of the selling of oil, the Food for Oil program, and the sanctions that they imposed on Iraq. That has caused the Iraqis never to be able to gain independence. So whenever the Iraqis do something that the Americans don't like, the Americans put pressure on them by withholding Iraqi money that's in American banks. They withhold it. Iraq cannot just take its money from the United States, the money that it gets from selling oil. It goes through those banks, and the Americans decide how much to give. That's the situation in Iraq. That has to be broken. And the Iraqis have to think. The problem is that the United States, NATO, the Arab regimes, and Turkey, they have their people in Iraq, and they're of course in the American camp. So whenever the majority in parliament that supports the resistance moves to weaken the U.S. position, all of these groups, the Kurdish groups and other groups that are linked to these countries, they all try to undermine the government. So the West has powerful tools in Iraq to keep this extraordinarily colonial stranglehold over the Iraqi people. That has to be dealt with. That's the real issue in Iraq. That is the real problem. And I think ultimately it will be dealt with, because the empire is declining, and there will be ways. I mean, the Iraqis have to start selling some of their oil in yuan. They have to start thinking of different ways of doing business, because this is not sustainable.
Yeah. Just before wrapping up, Professor Marandi, again, I want to come back to the case of Gaza and the West Bank. Without Gaza and the West Bank, you don't have the situation the way it is in Lebanon. We don't have the war against Yemen. We don't have the war against Iran. This is the whole calculation in the region, and we know how this war put.
And we wouldn't have had a dirty war in Syria.
Yeah, exactly. And this war is, Gaza is the root of all the problems in the region. Gaza, West Bank, and Palestine. And do you think that the region is going to understand it? GCC countries, Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, because they have to understand it. You all can prosperous, you can get better, you can improve, or all of you go down together. There is no other way for that, because the war against Iran has shown to GCC countries there is no way to participate, cooperate with Israelis against Iran, and you benefit from that. That's the outcome of this war. I would say the same thing for the Palestine. They have to do something about Palestine and the West Bank and Gaza all together.
Well, if Abdullah and Erdogan and Aliyev and Sisi and the leaders of these regimes in the Persian Gulf were not on the right side of history, if they were not on the wrong side of history, we wouldn't be where we are today. And they are, it's interesting, Iran and Yemen are the two countries that are not really under any direct threat from the Israeli regime. The Greater Israel Project includes Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. It doesn't include Yemen. It doesn't include Iran. But none of these, and it includes Turkey, Jordan, none of these countries are willing to take a move to do anything against it. They all collaborate. Everyone, all of these countries collaborate with it during the time of genocide. Some are smarter, like Erdogan. He, speaks a lot and pretends that he's like pro-Palestine, but that's just to propaganda to feed to his supporters, who still are, in their imagination, they think that their government supports Palestine, but none of them do. But if, as the U.S. empire weakens, I think it will be easier to convince some of these governments, at least for their own self-preservation, to change their policies, because their populations, the populations of all of these countries, support Palestine. In Turkey, the opposition, its supporters all support Palestine. In Egypt, everyone supports Palestine. In Jordan and elsewhere. So even if they were to take a neutral stance, if these countries, instead of choosing to continue down the road that they have chosen already, or in the past that they'd been going down until now, if they just choose to be neutral, tilt away from the United States, not to cooperate with the Israeli regime, the Israeli regime would be badly weakened.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Marandi, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Thank you very much for having me, Nima. It's always a pleasure.